Today's episode is entitled Growing Pains. And what stood out to me was, with most things we talk about on this podcast, communicating through your growing pains will help limit the adverse effect mentally as you're growing in your marriage.
And for me, my takeaway was, if you're not experiencing pain, maybe you're not pushing yourself hard enough. As a man, I'm sure you know what that means, because sometimes we don't want to feel that uncomfortability of pushing ourselves fully. But in order to experience the full amount of growth, we advise you to push as hard as you can. With that being said, keep listening for the full conversation.
We're always trying to constantly grow, right? Especially as husbands, that's what our podcast is about. And so we're just going to kind of circle back to one of the things we may not discuss so much, especially as husbands within our communities, if we even have a community of husbands to talk to, but kind of the pain points or the growing pains of being in a growth mindset and trying to move forward and become better. It just thought, it circles back to, for me, like lifting, because I just got back to doing some strength training, right? And that first week or first 2 weeks, like I was spent. Like I would come home, I would be tired, I would be sore, I couldn't lift, my arms. I'm taking the steps because I don't skip leg day. My calves might not say it, but my thighs and my hamstrings feel it, right? So I'm not going up steps, trying to stretch more, but there's physical pain to the physical growth that my muscles are doing. So, and I think the same thing happens with our relationships and even our personal headspace, right? As we're trying to grow and be better, there are some quote unquote pain points and there's some soreness there, but it's all for the betterment of ourselves, and our spouses and our other relationships too.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I am conscious of is that in a relationship, when either one or the other is trying to grow or you're trying to grow as a unit, there are growing pains for both parties. Right. And what we typically talk about on the podcast is, our wife being hopefully patient with us as we try to make these changes. Right. And, the funny thing is, I feel like we often make it come off like our wives are perfect. I think more or less what we're typically saying is they're better than us.
Yes, I will always lean that way for sure.
But there are areas in which our wives need to grow, areas in which they may want to grow. Having a conversation about that is a good idea.
Right.
Because the better you can help foster that for your spouse, the easier that growth is going to be. And, that's what we typically talk about on the podcast, is them fostering a space for us to make mistakes and, to grow within, or to grow into the man that we want to be, or the husband and father that we want to be. I'm not saying that it's easy. It's just easier.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think one of those things, and I heard on a different podcast that I listened to about, it's when you're in a thing, when you're in a growth space, or you're on a program or whatever, like you're in it, and as you're improving yourself, you're asking questions that you're asking yourselves to other people. So if you can, spark that with your wife, right? Now she's alongside with you on a growth journey. And now you're both kind of pinging ideas off each other, you're challenging each other, you're um, being accountable to each other. So it helps if you're in a growth mindset as a unit. I know sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes maybe she's on a path of growth where you're kind of in a um, consistent stage for right now. Um, and it's not time for you to kind of put that effort in. But if you guys decide as a unit that we're going to try to keep growth as an important part of our marriage, then that can definitely be something that um, makes those pains a little easier, because there'd probably be a space in your relationship for that. Um, so just a thought, I just thought about it as you were talking about supporting our wives as well. Um, that would be beneficial to both of you and your relationship as a whole.
Yeah. And I think it's worth being said, you can't be afraid to fail, right? And you're going to fail in many ways. So let's kind of just talk about this for a second. Typically, when we say don't be afraid to fail, your immediate thought is like, yeah, I'm trying to accomplish something, typically for myself, right? And I I don't want to say didn't see it all the way through, but had missteps and setbacks, right? Another place that you have to be conscious that you may fail is what we were just talking about, facilitating a space for your wife to be able to grow, right? Because listen, as humans, I don't even want to just say husbands, as humans, change is hard. And when you get used to something being a certain way, right? It's it's really hard to witness the change, not just see the outcome. What I mean by that is when you're conscious of something, let's say worst case scenario, something's being taken away from you, right? When you're conscious of that happening in the moment, like your instinct is to stop it from happening,
Right.
right? But I think if we have the conversations ahead of time, like, hey, this is what I would like to accomplish. Here are the things that may happen, right? So let's put a better example out there. Let's say your wife wants to go back to school,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to eat up some of your free time, right? Now you got to be more with the kids where she typically would have been.
Mm-hmm.
That's the type of scenario I'm talking about. Like your free time's being taken away from you, but it's for the greater good because your wife's going to go back to school. She's going to earn more money. That might be a couple years down the road, but that growth can create some pain, and you might fail in a couple moments where you might be a little tight that she has to walk out the door to go to school, and like now there's maybe she was studying or something and didn't get to do the dishes, and that falls on your shoulders, right? You got to do bath time with the kids or whatever the case may be. You have to be okay failing in that moment, or in some moments, I guess. Um, but with maintaining a growth mindset that, okay, I can get past this and it's going to be better the next time around, because, hey, we're going to have a conversation about it, and maybe adjust a couple things, right? Maybe be more considerate of each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling, but I hope my point got across.
No, that's good. I'm glad you circled back, because I definitely made a note of making a good growth space for us is being able to foster a place for our wives to grow as well. So I'm glad you circled back to that. What I would say about the don't be afraid to fail is to really grow, using the weight lifting analogy, right? To really get stronger. Um, you, for me, I'll just talk about for me. If I'm lifting free weights, I am exponentially stronger when I fail. But it's when I have a spotter or a partner that allows me to push to the point of exhaustion and being vulnerable enough to, like, I'm going to try this rep. but I probably am going to need help to get this back on the bar. That's when
Right.
my muscles grow the most. When I push them as far as I can go, and I'm vulnerable enough, like, hey, dude, you're gonna have to grab this because I'm not gonna get this back on the rack, right? But that is when I get stronger, and my body changes on a faster trajectory.
Mhm.
So for me, it's being vulnerable enough to, again, circle back to having the conversation. This is what I want to accomplish. This is what I think we have to do. What do you think, wife, spouse? How can we get better? How can my plan get better for the both of us for me to accomplish our goal? So, and then as it's going and you're diving in, if you veer from that plan that you've said, circle back, have a space for her to say, hey, like you said you wanted to do this, why aren't you doing it? Or you said you're doing this way, but you're not doing it this way. So either not sticking to the plan at all, not doing the plan at all, or just failing, at that same thing as you're trying to grow, but being open for her to be like, hey, like, I'm your spotter right here. Like, you're not doing this the correct way, or I'm going to push you. You said you want to do this. You got to do this way. This is what we agreed on it. Let's try it so we can see if it works or not. Right. So I hope that was a good analogy. What are your thoughts?
You, I had a very specific thought, and it's this: if you're not experiencing pain through your period of growth, maybe you're not growing enough, or maybe you're not putting in enough effort to make a change, right? And listen, to each their own. If you're cool with slow progression, that's all fine for you. I typically like to get things done as quickly as possible. Uh, and with that probably comes more mistakes, more pain. But I typically find that I learn faster and get to the result that I want faster as well, which sometimes to some people can seem counterintuitive, right? Because they want everything to be perfect, all the ducks lined up in a row. And all right, I'm gonna hop to this rock now, and that's safe, and I feel comfortable now. Okay, now I'll move to the next rock. Well, you know what? I'm gonna skip over 3 rocks. Oh, I slipped and I fell in the creek. But I'm gonna go back to the beginning and all right, now I'm gonna jump 2 rocks because that's more comfortable, and you know what I mean?
Right, right. No, I do, and I think it is to each their own. But the there's a whole process out there is kind of like failing fast. So
Mm.
like you don't jump to the end, but you go all in on this part. So it's more so like going in, seeing where the failure is before you move on till you get too far, and you're like, oh, like I totally missed step 2 because I jumped to step 4. But it's still the same level of intensity in that short period of time. So I'm going to go intense. I'm going to move to the next one. So there's a couple ways you could play this for sure, but it's all about being all in as you can and putting forth the most effort to do. But with that, there are going to be some blind spots that you didn't see. There are going to be some um, things you may have missed, or it may just be, I need to fail at this a lot of times before, I go forward. And we have to be okay with that, because that's really the only way you can grow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like the idea of deciding to be who you want to be before you're there. Right. You can learn along the way to be that person you want to be. I mean, if you really think about it, that's what we do all of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Down to the basic idea of, you know what? I want to be able to ride a bike. You hop on a bike before you know how to do it. You fail along the way. And then one day, guess what? You've learned because you're tired of falling on your butt. But you can do the same thing with getting a job. Sometimes we get into jobs we don't necessarily know how to do just yet, but we learn and we get coached into being that person. We have the potential to do the job. Sometimes people see that in us before we see it in ourselves. back to marriage. Our wives probably saw in us that we could be who we need to be a great husband, father, and community member. Um, and then they allow the space for that to happen.
Yeah, that is I like that bike analogy because that just lays it all out. That there's just something about us overthinking as we get older,
Mm.
right? A lot of us, learned how to ride a bike when we were kids. So like one, just physics wise, we're lower to the ground. So that fall, our bones are a little bit more pliable. We
Mm.
haven't had the experiences to know what we should be scared of or not yet. Um, so it's a lot of those things that play in. And um, I'm going to try to, now that, this stuck out to me, like when I'm trying to learn something new, come at it with that childlike naiveness, right? Because that is, we grow so much exponentially as children because we don't have experience, and then all of a sudden we get all these opportunities, but also like we don't overthink things. We're like, okay, this is the task and I'm going to focus on this thing right now. I know it's hard to do as an adult for sure, but when we have to carve out time to give our full energy to something. So if we carve out the space after you've already had the conversation with your wife, made the plan, time to do it is a part of the plan. So when you have that time, go all in, let her know, okay, I'm going to turn off my phone for 30 minutes. I'm going to be working on this thing, right? That gives us a chance to focus in, turn off all notifications, emails, any of that thing, go into it. Like, I'm going to learn as much as I can in these 30 minutes as possible for this specific topic. Um, and then just go for it. And if you happen to, when it's time to execute what you've learned, it might not go as well. But no, okay, that next 30 minutes, I'm going to figure out what I did wrong, make adjustments, come back and try again. Because that's all you did with your bike. Oh, I fell. Why did I fall? Let me try to do this again.
Yeah, that's good, man. Um, I had a thought but lost it because I didn't write it down. But I don't know that I have much more. I can always edit this part out.
As can I. Um, well, I guess we could say what would be what are some specific pains that come with growth?
That's good. What are some specific pains that come with growth? I think I alluded to one earlier, right? Talking about your wife going back to school or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, what are some specific pains that I've experienced in my attempt to grow as a husband? Um, Time away from the family is painful for me. It's painful for my wife. It's painful for my kids. Right? As I'm trying to grow as a business owner, um, as you try to grow as a community member, these things aren't always done together, and therefore, I even though I'm more conscious of it and am attempting to make a shift where I'm home more, there are times where my time is basically sucked up by different events, right? Um, so to make that choice is just ultimately making a conscious decision that I'm going to sacrifice this time in order to accomplish this. So that's one example.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about time, it might not be just physical time spent. Um, I think we have to talk about the mental time spent too, because um, just actively for me in this moment, like I'm working on a project just to kind of better myself um, as a developer, right? Um, but with that comes time because I'm physically in the house, right?
Mhm.
But I'm thinking about like even when, and I've run into this probably this past week, like thinking about the project even when I'm not working on it, or
Mm,
thinking about how do I make time to work on it. Um, Stepping out when you're in a group, because when you're developing and like you're learning stuff and things are working, like you want to stay in there, like, okay, this is working. When I click this, it's actually working. It's pulling things from here, right? So, and it's hard to pull away mentally. So even if I step out and I'm like, okay, I got to go do this thing with the family, it's like, okay, when can I get back? How can I do this? I'm thinking about it while I'm there. So I'm not, I still struggle with detaching not just my physical body from a space, but also my mental space. Um, but I think one of the ways that can help is talking about time spent with your wife.
mhm.
Like a lot of times I don't have those discussions. Like I'm just like trying to get back to the computer or think about it when I'm not there. Now I'm distracted. But if I said, hey, you know, when once our last child's in bed, like I'm going to work on this for, an hour, or after we do what we normally do, once she's in bed, I'm going to try to take this hour to do this. Um, and I think that would kind of stop the mental anguish that I'm giving myself. Um, and a lot of times, sometimes it is, a lot of times, sometimes it's it's self-inflicted too. But I think time for sure is a big growing pain. Um, as I'm thinking about it. Do you have
Yeah.
another one?
Of course I do.
Okay.
Um, we've spoken about it before, but when you're trying to get your money situation together, right, and you're creating a budget and trying to pay off debt, you're making a conscious decision to not spend money in areas that you typically would. So, how did I put it the other day, or the other episode? You know, uh, Growing in wealth sometimes can make you feel broke.
Mhm.
Right, so that pain of having to say no to your children, sometimes being that accountability partner for your wife and saying no, like we can't spend on this right now, saying no to your friends that, hey, I'm not going out to dinner this time, or you know feeling like maybe too often you're that guy that has to try to reframe the conversation so you can afford to do something. Like, well, what if we just cook at home? Right. um so that could be painful because when you make a plan to improve your finances, it's never a quick thing, right? So it could be 2, 3, 4 year plan that you're on. And
Mhm.
that's a long time to be saying no to people. And that's a long time to deprive yourself. Right. So that is, in my opinion, one of the main growth pains that we're feeling right now.
Yeah, I think no, that's good. I think another space that we don't talk about is kind of the environment that you're in. Um, Kind of like when you're in a growth space and not everyone is in your house,
Mm,
or you're in a growth space in your house and you realize that you're failing at whatever it is. There can be tension with you, which then projects tension in the house. So that is
mhm,
definitely a pain of growth. And then having the conversation, working through that, really figuring out why do I feel this way, and why, and am I projecting this onto the other members of my family? Or if we haven't communicated at all, then there's just tension there because you're in a different mindset than your wife is. So the solution for this is communication, and even that is still tough. It's a pain point of communication when you admit, hey, I'm failing and I'm constantly failing, or she's pointing out to you, you know, this isn't working out right now. So your environment and your space can be a little bit more tense, a little bit more heightened. little bit more sensitive, but it's one of those necessary pains that you have to have to move on.
Yeah, I love that you got there because as you were talking, my mind went there, experiencing, you know, failing in a moment and your wife just pointing it out, right? Like maybe like, and it could be happening in a couple different ways. Maybe she's just saying, you know, maybe you should try something, not something different, but try to accomplish this in a different way, right? Or maybe she's coming to you and telling you that this isn't working for me. Something needs to change. And I've been in the space before where, you know, I've been hard headed, stubborn, however you want to call it. But, you know, I would just revert to this tone, this, you know, mental space where I'm just like getting defensive because all I know in my heart is I'm trying to be better. Right. And I, you can sometimes take those comments, which are innocent. Yeah, you take them personally, you take them as an attack. So I love what you said, having those conversations, you know, early and often is so beneficial. And having those check-ins on progress helps you with accountability, um, and really helps you check yourself to make sure that you're actually making progress. Because that's another thing with growing pains. Sometimes you get into a space where you've made a little bit of improvement and you sometimes you might have the tendency to make that your new home. Right?
Mhm.
You're like, oh, I advanced this little bit and I'm just going to stay here. And then you know, sometimes your wife calls you out on it, like, hey, I thought you were planning on going all the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's good to point out that growing pain is small success, right? Because if you land in that space, just like you're saying, like, okay, it's not the larger goal, but I did this, so I'm pretty awesome, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe this feels good, so I'll stay here. Um, but that is all could ultimately be your demise
Mhm.
because you're not moving to your next goal. So I think that's good. I like that. Circling back real quick, kind of meshing these 2 points together, but um, having just the point of having communication, if you're not that great of a communicator, is a growing pain.
Mm.
So I'm wrapping up our communication segment and our environment segment by just saying, if you're, say you haven't listened to any of our podcasts and we're big on communicating and growing, and we ourselves are growing, and you're on this journey with us as we grow as husbands. But if you're not, the light bulb moment has just come, like, oh, I should probably work on my communication, like that is a growing pain in itself. That's like a whole thing in itself. But add that with trying to grow in other areas and you're not a communicator or not a great verbal communicator, like that is a growing pain because it's like growing on top of growing. Like I want to do this thing and be better, but now I have to talk about this the entire process. And that shines the light and exposes.
Yeah.
So another growing pain is self-exposure, right? Because we don't always want to look at ourselves fully and holistically. But when you're trying to grow, um, why you grow so well is generally when you have a mindset to grow in one thing, you grow in other things. Um, More specifically, your marriage. If you're thriving in your marriage, generally those attributes that you're gaining can help you in all areas of your life. But specifically for anything, you can apply that to as well, because your mind is now shifting. How can I get better? Then you're like, oh, I'm not so good over here either. So either I'm going to try to do it together, or I'm going to, okay, now I'm going to have to put that on the list. This is the next thing I'm going to try to grow in. But you see, there's a light, just like, oh, like you got to be better. and you'll want to be better as you become better.